The wind was sharp and cold as the cowboy rode across the snowy plains. The ground was white and frozen, and every step of his horse made a crunching sound that echoed through the silent hills. He had been on the trail for days, returning from a long cattle drive, and the winter cold seemed harsher than he remembered. The sky was darkening as evening approached, and the snow started to fall lightly, dusting his coat and hat. He tightened his grip on the reins and urged his horse forward, looking for the familiar line of trees that marked the edge of the valley where his cabin was. As he rounded a frozen creek, something caught his eye. There was a small figure huddled near the bank, barely moving. At first he thought it was a bundle of cloth or a lost animal, but as he drew closer he realized it was a woman. She was sitting on the frozen ground, wrapped in a ragged blanket, shivering violently. Her cheeks were red from the cold and her hair was tangled and damp. She lifted her head and looked at him with eyes full of fear and desperation. "Please, don't leave me to freeze," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll give you a warm bed every night if you help me." The cowboy hesitated. He had been taught to be cautious. Strangers could bring trouble, and he did not know this woman or the dangers she might bring. Yet her honesty and the raw need in her eyes made him pause. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a flask of water and a small piece of bread he had saved from lunch. "Here," he said gently, holding it out. "Drink this and eat something. You need your strength." Her lips trembled as she took the water, drinking slowly, and then she bit into the bread. Relief washed over her face and she smiled weakly, though the cold still made her shiver. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what I would have done if you had passed me by." She told him her name was Naomi. Her husband had been killed months earlier in a raid, leaving her alone on the frozen plains. She had tried to survive on her own, but the winter had been merciless. She had no relatives nearby, no neighbors to help her, and the little cabin she lived in was falling apart. Nights were the hardest. The wind blew through the cracks and the cold seeped into her bones. She had spent many evenings watching the stars, hoping someone kind would stop and offer her help. The cowboy listened quietly. He could feel her loneliness and the weight of her loss. He had lived alone much of his life, and he knew the emptiness that isolation could bring. Still, he was wary. Helping her meant taking a risk, leaving the safety of his cabin and the routines he knew so well. Yet something deep inside him urged him to act. "Come with me," he said finally. "I'll help you get to your cabin. We'll see what can be done to keep you warm." She nodded, grateful, and rose slowly to her feet. The snow was thick and she stumbled a few times, but he stayed close, guiding her gently. Her small cabin was not far, but the journey through the frozen landscape was hard. The cold bit at his face and the wind whipped around them, making the snow sting like tiny needles. Still, the woman's determination kept them moving. When they arrived, he saw that her cabin was small and fragile. The roof sagged in the middle and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, it smelled of old wood and dry herbs. There was a small fireplace, but it had not been lit in days and the hearth was cold. He could see that she had tried to keep it tidy, arranging what little furniture she had with care. Despite the poverty and decay, there was a sense of dignity in the way she had kept her home. The woman quickly set about preparing a simple meal. She had a few dried vegetables and some flour, which she mixed into a thin stew over the small fire. The cowboy watched her work, noticing the care she took even in her difficult circumstances. They shared the meal quietly, speaking in soft voices. She told him stories of her people, the Apache traditions, and the hardships she had faced since losing her husband. He listened, realizing that her strength and resilience were remarkable. That night, he helped her start a fire in the hearth, gathering enough wood to last until morning. She shivered less as the flames grew, and for the first time in weeks she could sleep without trembling from the cold. He found a corner of the cabin where he could lie down, using his coat and a blanket to keep warm. Though the space was small, it was better than being outside in the freezing night. As they lay by the fire, the woman spoke again. "I know you didn't have to stop for me," she said softly. "I don't even know if I can ever repay you. But please, if you can, stay a little longer. I can offer you warmth and shelter every night. You won't regret it." Her words lingered in his mind. He had always been self-reliant, used to making his own way in the world. Accepting help or giving it was not something he did lightly. But in that moment, he realized that staying could be more than just an act of kindness. It could mean forming a bond, a connection that would make the harsh winter easier to bear for both of them. Morning came slowly, and the sunlight reflected off the snow, casting a pale glow into the cabin. The woman had prepared another small meal, and they ate together quietly. She thanked him again for stopping, for not leaving her alone in the cold. He felt a strange sense of purpose, a feeling he had not known in a long time. Helping her survive the winter was no longer just a matter of charity. It was about trust, connection, and shared survival. The days that followed were challenging. They gathered wood together, repaired the cabin where it had weakened, and ensured the fire stayed strong each night. The cowboy taught her a few tricks he had learned over years on the plains: how to check the ice on a creek, how to make a simple trap for small game, how to stretch supplies until the next trip to town. She in turn showed him how to read the land in ways he had never considered, how to find edible roots and herbs, and how to understand the subtle signs of approaching storms. They worked side by side, and slowly a bond began to form. It was quiet at first, a simple companionship born of mutual respect and need. Yet, with each shared meal and each conversation by the fire, they began to understand each other better. He noticed her courage, her patience, and the way she maintained her dignity despite her hardships. She noticed his calmness, his resourcefulness, and the way he quietly protected her without making her feel weak or dependent. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, she turned to him with a small smile. "You saved me from the cold," she said softly. "But more than that, I think I am grateful for your company. I don't feel so alone anymore." He looked at her and realized she was right. The long winter nights had been lonely, but now, sitting by the fire, he felt a sense of purpose and warmth he had not known in years. For the first time, he wondered if survival could be more than just enduring. It could be shared, and that sharing made it richer, fuller. The night settled around them, cold outside but warm in the little cabin. The fire crackled softly, and they sat together, letting the silence speak for them. Both of them knew that life on the frontier was hard, and that challenges would come, but in that small space there was trust, safety, and hope. They had met by chance in a frozen landscape, but their meeting had changed something fundamental in each of them. And as they lay down to rest, the cowboy knew one thing for certain: stopping for this desperate woman had been the right choice. It was more than saving a life. It was the beginning of a connection that could carry them both through the harshest winter, and perhaps beyond. The days passed slowly as winter continued to grip the plains. The cowboy stayed with Nayeli, the Apache woman, helping her survive the harsh weather. Each morning the frost coated the windows of the small cabin, and each night the wind rattled the roof. Despite the cold, they found warmth and companionship. Their routine became simple but vital: gathering firewood, checking supplies, preparing meals, and keeping the small herd of goats safe from the bitter weather. The cowboy noticed how clever and resourceful Nayeli was. She knew the land in ways he never had. She showed him how to find water beneath the ice, how to identify which plants were edible, and how to track the movement of small animals for food. He, in turn, shared his knowledge of survival on the plains: how to repair the cabin walls to keep out drafts, how to store meat safely in the freezing cold, and how to use traps to catch rabbits and squirrels. Together, they created a small system that kept them both alive and relatively comfortable. One morning, after a night of heavy snowfall, the cowboy looked out the window and noticed the snow piled high against the cabin walls. "We will have to dig a path to the creek," he said, tightening his coat. Nayeli nodded, wrapping a thick blanket around her shoulders. They worked side by side, shoveling snow, clearing a path, and checking the ice on the creek. The physical labor warmed their bodies and created a sense of teamwork that neither had expected. As they worked, they talked. Nayeli shared memories of her late husband, of happier times in the tribe, and of the lessons she had learned growing up in the mountains and valleys. The cowboy listened, sometimes offering small stories of his own life on the plains, the long drives with cattle and the nights spent alone under the stars. Their conversations were simple, yet they built trust and understanding. In a place where survival was a daily struggle, words and stories became a connection stronger than any wall or fire. One day, while checking the small herd, they noticed footprints in the snow that did not belong to them. A band of outsiders had been nearby, likely searching for food or supplies. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "We must be careful," he said. They could take our goats or worse. Nayeli agreed, and together they devised a plan to protect the cabin. They moved the goats to a safer pen, reinforced the doors and windows, and prepared to defend their home if necessary. When the outsiders approached, the cowboy and Nayeli were ready. They stayed quiet in the cabin, watching as the strangers passed by unaware of the reinforced defenses. The experience reminded them that life on the frontier was full of danger, and that survival required both courage and planning. But it also brought them closer together. They realized that in this vast empty land, they had become each other's family, protector, and friend. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, the days grew warmer, and the snow began to melt. The rivers swelled with runoff, and the plains started to reveal their hidden colors. Flowers and grasses peeked through the white, and the first buds of trees began to appear. Life felt lighter, and with the changing season, the bond between the cowboy and Nayeli deepened. They continued to work together, but now there was more laughter and warmth in their routine. Nayeli would sing quietly while preparing meals, and the cowboy would sometimes join in with soft hums. They shared small moments of joy, watching the sunrise over the plains, finding a patch of wild herbs, or simply sitting by the fire in the evening and talking about what they would do in the coming months. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with orange and pink, Nayeli turned to the cowboy. "I cannot imagine having survived this winter without you," she said softly. "You saved me, but more than that, you became a part of my life. I am grateful for everything you have done." The cowboy looked at her and felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He had always been independent, used to doing things alone, but staying with Nayeli had changed him. He realized that survival was not only about facing the elements, but about the bonds we form and the people we trust. In her eyes, he saw strength, honesty, and resilience, qualities that had inspired him every day. They spent the next weeks preparing for the future. The cowboy helped Nayeli plant seeds for a small garden that would provide vegetables in the coming months. They repaired the cabin roof completely and created a better system to store food safely. Nayeli taught him more about Apache traditions, and he shared ideas about improving their life on the plains. Their skills complemented each other, and their respect and admiration for one another grew. Challenges still came. One night, a strong windstorm blew across the valley, shaking the cabin and rattling the windows. The fire threatened to die, and they worked together to keep it burning, moving logs and adjusting the chimney to prevent smoke from filling the room. They laughed and encouraged each other, even as the storm raged outside. These moments, filled with both struggle and teamwork, cemented their trust and companionship. Over time, their relationship became more than just survival. They began to understand each other's hearts and hopes. Nayeli would prepare small gifts from the herbs and plants she found, placing them near the cowboy's corner of the cabin. The cowboy, in return, would carve simple tools or utensils, leaving them for her to discover. These gestures were small but meaningful, a silent language of care and appreciation. By the time the snow had fully melted, the plains were alive again with the sights and sounds of spring. The goats grazed in green pastures, the garden was growing, and the cabin was warm and safe. The cowboy and Nayeli stood side by side, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a sense of accomplishment and peace. Nayeli turned to him, a soft smile on her face. "I do not know what the future holds," she said, "but I know that I do not want to face it alone. You are part of my life now, and I hope you feel the same." The cowboy looked at her, remembering the cold night when he first found her shivering by the frozen creek. He had stopped to help out of compassion, but now he realized that the choice had brought something far more valuable: connection, trust, and the beginnings of love. "I feel the same," he replied simply. "We face it together, whatever comes." They embraced quietly, understanding that life on the frontier would always have challenges, but with trust and companionship, those challenges could be faced together. What had started as an act of kindness had grown into a deep bond. The story ended with the promise of a new beginning, not just for survival, but for building a shared life filled with warmth, respect, and hope. The cowboy and Nayeli had discovered that the harsh winter, the lonely plains, and the endless struggles were not the end. They were a path to a new chapter. Together they had created a home, a sense of safety, and a connection that neither would ever forget. They had learned that even in the coldest, harshest times, Kindness and trust could lead to a life richer than either had imagined. And as the stars appeared in the clear spring sky, they sat by the fire in their small cabin, no longer just two survivors of a hard winter, but companions ready to face whatever the future might bring, side by side with hearts warm and full,